Ladies and gentlemen, it is my greatest pleasure to introduce to you Mr. William Fennell, esteemed gentleman of this parish, wine merchant and importer of the finest spirits from across Europe, and father to Miss Louisa Fennell, also of this parish, Wakefield's most famous artist.
Welcome, welcome everyone. My name is William Fennell, and this is my wonderful daughter Louisa. It's my utter privilege to walk with you today, telling you some stories about Wakefield when I lived here, but also about how my talented daughter Louisa rose to fame across this glorious country of ours. Of course, this was not always like it is now. When I was living on Little Westgate with my wife, Mary, and all of our children, this area was mostly fields. The market near to this site, one that many of you may remember, was built in the 1960s. But before that, a Victorian market had stood, from where New Look is now situated. Before that, the market's home was in the marketplace, or what you now call the Bull Ring. Before that, however, the market was in front of the church, and came up towards our house on Little Westgate. Louisa was only 4 or 5 when it moved, and we missed the hustle and bustle of that old market on Silver Street and Bread Street. But the short walk to Marketplace was easy. Louisa would often go with her Aunt White to buy eggs, a favourite of hers, and we would spend hours talking in my study of the things she had seen and heard. I could tell from the beginning Louisa was a watcher of people, and her descriptions to me of the colours and people she had seen, even at that young age, was astounding. I believe Miss Sarah has an old photograph of the early marketplace on the Bull Ring. Miss Sarah.
Thank you, Mr. Fennell. Yes, as you can see from this first photograph, the marketplace with its horses and carts was thriving. First built in 1851, it was demolished in 1962. Here is what it looked like just before it was redeveloped in 1962. Of course, it's never referred to as the Bull Ring on official maps. Who would want to name a place after some of the most violent animal cruelty possible? Bulls baited by dogs. Oh, the blood and the gore. It was exciting. That went on for years. Let me tell you about the time when...
Yes, thank you, Miss Sarah. I'm sure these good people don't want to hear all about that. But I miss the horses. They were so elegant. Even in my lifetime, and certainly Louisa's, things changed beyond recognition. Thank goodness my Louisa painted scenes from our city before so many of them disappeared. So, let us continue down Vicarage Street, where we will be able to see the view up Westmoreland Street and the cathedral that Louisa was most fond of. Miss Sarah, are you ready? Here we are at Warrengate in the Springs, once the entrance to parkland that belonged to the Earls of Warren. If you look up Westmoreland Street, you can see the cathedral. This building, known as Customs House, was once part of the elegant old Vicarage Croft and Rectory House. Miss Sarah, do you have a photograph of the old vicarage?
I do, Mr. Fennell, yes. Did you know, Mr. Fennell, that part of this still exists?
Does it, Miss Sarah? How so?
The Masons took that building over and built around it, so inside it the stairs from the vicarage still exist. Great, big, heavy wooden ones, right back from the 12th century. Women couldn't go in there then, and they cannot go in there now.
Thank you, Miss Sarah. Of course, this area was full of our city's dead from centuries before, and I well remember the terrible time when grave robbing was a quick way to earn money. And despite it being one of the main gates to our city and guarded well, there was a terrible incident of grave robbing in 1832. Miss Horrocks, who had female boarders at the Great House, known as the Old Rectory, was a fine old mansion with a courtyard and garden in front, and handsome wrought iron gates. It was just here that they were woken by the dreadful noise that goes with grave robbing. You can imagine the terrible scenes the boarders must have seen and heard from their windows. Bodies strewn about and the violent shouting in darkness. Only one of the grave robbers was caught. If it had been 15 years earlier, he would have been whipped in our marketplace and never made it to York for trial. Dreadful business for anyone to witness, but a good reminder that they were to behave themselves. Yes, the cat was used up until the 1830s then, which was the whip. And a formidable weapon it was as well, having 9 strings of whipcord, about 2 feet in length, with a knot tied on each string, at intervals of 2 inches. The wretched culprit was tied, with outstretched arms, to the back of a cart, much like the one Louisa has painted here. Commencing from the old bailiff house, which is where I believe your Boots store is today, to the Elephant and Castle in Westgate, and afterwards the cuts were washed with gunpowder and water, a very cruel and horrible thing, my Louisa once said, for apparently the pain was almost greater than the flogging itself. The purpose? To leave an indelible mark, of course, and to let everyone know about the criminal element in our midst. Our family were directly affected by such scoundrels one time, but more of that later.
Mr. Fennell, I'll show them a photograph of the springs and the end of Warrengate. I have one here. I always used to get my water from this spring, right here, fresher than the one up in town. At this one the water was flowing, not like that well up by the church. People used to chuck all sorts in there.
Indeed, Miss Sarah. See Westmoreland Street now? This was merely a footpath leading up to an old entrance into the churchyard, before Louisa even painted this scene. At the end of the row of old houses further along there was a small cottage under a narrow archway, inhabited by an old woman, who was celebrated as a fortune teller, and drove a thriving trade. Her name was Fanny Rapp, and she was a singular-looking woman, who used to wear a man's cloth coat with the tails cut off, over her feminine attire. But let us continue on up Westmoreland Street to the other side of our old church. Come with me as we walk up Westmoreland Street into the Springs and turn into Cathedral Walk, a lesser-known ginnel that brings us out right by the old church, now the cathedral, at the bottom of Northgate, looking up Cross Square. Here we are. Miss Sarah, are you well?
I don't like it up here. It's very unnerving. I may need a spot of Gilbert's gin, Mr. Fennell, if you don't mind. Just for my nerves, you understand.
Well, we have been a city here since 1888, but our merry city has been here since at least 1086, and is in the Doomsday Book, so many folk have walked our streets, and plenty have died. Perhaps some are still with us. Here we are at the bottom of Butcher's Row, sometimes known as the Shambles, and here was where the market was during medieval times, with stalls running up both Cross Square and Bread Street towards our house. We had the finest wine cellar in the whole of the north, and I personally loved travelling abroad to learn about the different varieties of grape. Louisa would miss me when I was gone and made a note of it. Let me see, I'll just consult her diary. Yes, here we are. March 13th, father to Bordeaux. Which is very helpful to me indeed. I recall how I imported Brut champagne from that region for the first time into this great country of ours, and it became a favourite, shall we say, of the higher classes. Lower classes enjoyed beer served by the Ring a Bells tavern that was on this corner, and what a scandal it was when Betty Tingle, the landlady of that esteemed establishment, fell in the well outside, breaking up a fight. That well was our main source of drinking water. Her body festered in that well for weeks before it was fished out. I know the well was covered up after that, and then of course all of this was all demolished in 1909 to make way for Cross Square. Miss Sarah, do you have that photograph of their old ring-a-bells?
I do, Mr. Fennell. If you put your back to the old church, now the cathedral, and look up Cross Square, on this photograph you can see one of the buildings in Louisa's paintings. The Ring-a-Bells public house is the building on the corner with a jutting out roofline. Opposite, the curved building is where Costa is now. This whole area was cleared in 1908 and for a long time looked like this later photograph where the old Barclays Bank, now Cubana, stands.
Let us carry on to the other side of this magnificent old church and see the great building through Louisa's eyes a little closer. Ah, our lovely old church. And from the east end, standing at the entrance to Almshouse Lane, it looks delightful. You can see that Louisa had painted it before it was extended in 1900, based on her earlier sketches no doubt, but with a very sophisticated style, a style which grew as a result of her studying in Rome and travelling throughout Europe to hone her skills. Her paintings were in great demand, and her work was exhibited in London as part of the Royal Society during her 40s. I recall there being some kind of disagreement with someone called Mr. Mulgrave about her not being allowed to attend that exhibition, with her being a woman. Not something I agreed with, of course, and I did write to the society, but Louisa had her own way of getting around things. Of course, we went to the Unitarian Chapel on Westgate as a rule, but as their status was not recognised in law, we came here as well. Indeed, it was at the chapel I first met Mr. John Batty Tootle, who I engaged to become Louisa's art tutor. I believe there is something written on this board about him from her diary. Miss Sarah, would you like to read it out loud for me whilst I polish my spectacles?
Of course, Mr. Fennell. Louisa travelled widely and painted scenes from around the world, but she always returned to her hometown of Wakefield to be with her family. An extract from her diary reveals her excitement at having her first art lesson. The diary starts with the birth of her brother Walter in January 1860. This is proudly followed with, "I had my first drawing lesson with Mr. Tootle." It was John Batty Tootle who helped his young prodigy develop her skills and earn a place in art college. Louisa's childhood diary entries touch on another major event in the city, the rebuilding of the cathedral spire, which stretches 247 feet high and remains the tallest church in Yorkshire. Louisa's April the 4th entry reveals that the old spire was opened to allow people to visit it before it was taken down and rebuilt. Months later, she writes about attending a commemoration for the finished building and getting to touch the giant weathercock before it was placed on top of the spire.
Thank you, Miss Sarah. Ah yes, Walter, my good boy, good looking, takes after his mother. I will never forget when they took that weather vane down. The crowds. Let's see what Louisa says in a diary about this. She says, yes, here it is, on 4th of April 1857. Today and yesterday people allowed to top of spire on old church before the old one comes down. Ah yes, and on the 5th of April, vane taken down from old church.
Mr. Fennell, I understand Louisa's original diary is in our history centre, but I also know you and Louisa had a shared love of scrapbooking. What happened to them all?
I believe they are in your museum archives. I'm glad. I hope they are being looked after. Shall we continue a little further down Almshouse Lane? Unrecognisable, isn't it? Well, this is what it looked like in 1898 when this lane was bustling with life and was one of the main thoroughfares to Portobello, where we would often go to see the riflemen drill. Indeed, going to see their rifle practice is mentioned in Louisa's diary. Now, where is it? Yes. Went to see rifleman drill and preparatory school with Aunt White, 9th of April. She doesn't say any more in here, which surprises me, because I remember very well how chatty she was about how smartly the men stood and the bright colours of their uniforms. My wife's sister, Louisa's Aunt White, had a lot to say about how Wakefield was being developed. She preferred the land to remain unchanged. But not everything can stay rural like my Mary's home in Criggleston. Miss Sarah, now what did I do with that picture of the old White family estate? It's under a school now, I believe, with only the old stables visible, but it's still in the countryside.
I've got that picture here, Mr. Fennell. You know, when I first arrived in Wakefield area, I lived near your old family estate. Look, see, here is a drawing by your wife, Miss White, from 1838, before she became Mrs. Fennell. It's still that rural, and the outbuildings are still there and used as a farm. The main house went under Mackay Hill School, named for John Mackay, who bought the farm from the White family. But the only way to get to the top of the hill was along Primrose Lane, one of the oldest lanes in Wakefield, so Mary and Louisa, and indeed yourself, Mr. Fennell, would often walk that delightful lane right past my house. I recall catching a glimpse of you all once or twice before I moved into town.
Indeed, Miss Sarah, a beautiful rural setting. Shall we carry on? There are more paintings I would like to show you. If you would like to come with me to George Street and the Shepherd's Rest. Welcome to Mr. Tootle's home. Mr. Tootle set up the Wakefield School of Art with Mr. Cromack immediately after the Great Exhibition in 1865. His back wall, where Louisa's picture of the Shepherd's Rest is sited, is exactly where she set up to sketch and paint the Shepherd's Rest. In those days this was a highly desirable area despite the huge cattle market around the corner, so Mr. Tootle must have set her up to paint this view from his back garden. Miss Sarah, did you have those two photographs?
I certainly do, Mr. Fennell. This was not the only watering hole around here. If you came to the market, you had a choice of 5 places to indulge in within 200 yards of one another. The Cattle Market Hotel, the Bull Fair House, the Graziers, the Ram Hotel, and of course the Shepherd's Rest. It must have been ever so noisy, Mr. Fennell. Look, here's a photograph of the market when it was at its height. It was the largest in the north of England. It started in 1765 and ended in 1963.
Louisa liked quiet when she worked, though. In fact, she liked quiet all of the time. She used to hate socialising, never went to any of the charity functions we were constantly putting on to raise funds for the Great Dispensary, or the establishment of the girls' school. I only recall her visiting the music saloon once to hear my lecture on Egyptian artefacts. Mind you, her sisters often went, and her brothers Richard and Walter. Of course, I was always the wealthy man you see before you, my own father being an East India merchant, but by marrying my cousin, Mary White, we share the same grandfather, William White. I entered the wine business in 1834. I was able to ensure I could give the best to my children, my daughters especially. Only the best personal tutors for them, Mr. Tootle included, and opportunities that set them up for life. Few of my daughters married. They didn't have to. We were not always lucky though, and I remember just before I married and joined the company, dear Mary's family were burgled. They were living in St. John's Square at the time. Lovely area.
Mr. Fennell, I'm good at telling a tale, aren't I? May I? Well, two ragamuffins called Henry Wright and Edward Thompson broke into the family home on a dark summer's night in 1834. They helped themselves to 2 diamond rings, several other rings, a gold necklace, silver cream jugs and silver spoons and anything else they fancied. But they were caught, weren't they, Mr. Fennell, and punished. You made sure of that, didn't you? Transported they were to New South Wales. Edward arrived safe and sound with only scurvy and the odd death of a fellow prisoner to deal with, but poor Henry's hulk was shipwrecked off the coast of Van Diemen's Land, and he drowned. Not nice, eh, Mr. Fennell? Turn anyone to drink the thought of that.
No, Miss Sarah, not nice at all. Shall we head up towards Westgate and the old bakehouse? I'm sure these lovely people would like to see where I lived. And here we are, at the heart of our Wakefield. Westgate was, in my time, the most desirable street to live on outside of London, with magnificent buildings from the Georgian era providing an elegant and desirable place to live. Miss Sarah, it was this high standard of living that brought you and your wine to Wakefield, I believe?
Yes, it was. It was actually people who talked about the vibrancy of Wakefield and the photographs of Westgate in a newspaper just a few years ago that I saw on one of my very long train journeys that prompted me to come here. If you look closely, you can see that the view is not so different now than it was. I think it's rather elegant looking that way, Mr. Fennell. If we stand with our backs to where the old bakehouse once stood and look across the little Westgate, I can still remember what your home looked like. It was one of the most beautiful houses on this road. Built in the 1700s, I believe, Mr. Fennell. I only have photographs of what it was like just before it was pulled down in 1963, long after it had been sold off as your esteemed wine establishment to become the Cock and Crown pub.
I know, and my wine cellars were immense. And now, a charity shop stands where our world-renowned business used to be. If you go into the lighting shop and go down the stairs, the cavern underneath stretches way down Little Westgate and under the shops above. Can you imagine that full of the best wine in the country? Of course, my son Richard ran the business into the ground, and in 1922 it went bankrupt. The drinking parties that boy used to have with that Gissing boy who lived just over the road caused the family such shame and embarrassment. Louisa and her sister Emily moved up to St John's Square in 1919 to get away from such monstrous behaviour. There is a blue plaque to her memory on number 21 now. She is buried in the graveyard there too. I'd like to go and pay my respects after our walk if you would care to join me.
I will gladly come with you, Mr. Fennell.
But back to the old bakehouse. Of course, Louisa looked upon this scene every day of her life until she was 15 years old. If we look closely at the painting, we can see just how rooted our city was in the medieval period. Miss Sarah, do you have the sketch of the old bakehouse? And of when it was revealed again, when this whole area was redeveloped in the 1960s?
You can see from this sketch done by Louisa that she was really quite good at pencil work. And so I think it was wonderful when she returned to Wakefield that so many of the original sketches she did when she was younger gave her such inspiration to create the paintings on these panels you see around our city. As Mr. Fennell was saying, the bakehouse was seen once again in this photograph of the area at the beginning of the redevelopment. Notice how the apex of the original on the far end has reappeared within the old building. It's the chimneys that give it away.
Louisa painted most of the sketches she made from her teenage years. If you were to walk further down Westgate following the dots along the way, you would find 2 more of Louisa's canvases. The first showing 3 houses, again in the medieval style, and the second showing Westgate Bridge and Common. The houses have completely gone, but the second of her paintings, if you look carefully, show recognisable buildings today. Many of the old buildings in her painting still survive. In fact, this area, as we head towards Silver Street, Wood Street, Bread Street and Market Cross, are really very much the same.
I wish I could hear her story in her own words, Mr. Fennell.
Yes, I too would love to hear her voice again.
Wakefield Industrial and Fine Art Exhibition, 1865. Beating men many years older than her, this is where the first signs of 18-year-old Louisa's genius started to shine.
No, thank you. Thank you, Barry. She will love that, truly.
No, I can't promise anything, you understand.
Of course not. And I will never ask that of you anyway. But, oh, there she is. I must tell her right away. Can you excuse me?
I can't promise, remember?
Louisa!
Yes, Father?
I've been looking for you everywhere, Lou.
Yes, I thought you would be. I'm sorry.
That's quite all right. No harm done.
No, not about... I mean, I'm sorry for...
For what, Lou? What grievous sin could you have committed in this art exhibition? Wait. It's not that Harris boy, is it? I've never trusted his eyebrows.
No, not him.
Oh, dear me. What's this about, then?
I didn't mean to do it, Father. Truly, I didn't. I entered the competition because it seemed like such fun. I never thought that I'd actually win.
You never thought that... You think I'm angry because you beat me, Louisa? Because you got higher honours?
Well, it must be terribly embarrassing to have been beaten by your daughter, especially since you entered twice to just my one measly entry.
I must confess, I hadn't thought of it like that. But no, Lou, I'm not embarrassed. And I'm certainly not angry.
You're not?
How could I be angry? I am proud. I've always known my girls are talented. Just like their mother.
You think I'm talented?
I know you are. And listen to me. Money can buy you a lot and we are fortunate to have the means. But try as it might, high society has never been able to manufacture talent. And it never will. And that is yours, Lou. Wholly and truly your own gift.
Not mine, really. The lessons with Mother, all our time colouring in your study, the Prince of India, the ostriches...
Yes, Lou, yes! Hasn't it been fun?
Of course it has.
The question is, and it's a very important question, what will you do with it? Your gift, I mean.
Well, I don't know. I just love to see things and record them.
And when you close your eyes, Louisa, close them now.
But there's so many people.
And none of them matter but us. Close your eyes. That's right. And now answer me this. If you were to paint for the rest of your life, if you were to draw your way across the world, would that make you happy?
Yes, I'd love to do that forever.
You can always do that, Louisa. My study is always open to whenever you want to sit with me. But that's not quite what I mean. You see...
What is it?
You're outgrowing us.
What? I could never.
It wasn't a one-off, Louisa. You're progressing so fast. You need someone who can keep up with the clarity of your eyes, the skill of your hands. And that's just not me.
I don't understand. Don't you like our time together?
It's not that. It could never be that. I'm explaining this all wrong. Do you trust me, Louisa?
Always.
Then I have someone for you to meet. His name is Mr. Tootle, and he's an artist and teacher of great renown.
Aged 23, Louisa is flying high. She travels to paint Trafalgar in London, and later her entry is chosen as the newly formed Wakefield School Board's Common Seal. The world is opening to her, not because of her money, not because of her name, but because of her ability. And Louisa was soon given the acclaim of exhibiting at the Royal Society of British Artists at their Suffolk Street Gallery in London. Yet, female artists were not actually eligible for membership.
I don't understand. You are exhibiting my paintings. Why am I not allowed to attend meetings?
It is not that we don't want you to attend exactly. It is that it would be best if you weren't quite so visible.
Forgive me, but that sounds like much the same thing.
Louisa, let me explain.
Yes, please do. Because what I am hearing is that the Royal Society will have my work, but not me.
Your work is competent. There is no question of that. Your teachers... Mr. Tootle and Mr. Hartley, they were quite gifted, I'd wager. And I can see you have worked as hard as any woman might. Yet it is one thing to see her name upon a scene. It is quite another to be confronted by her, by her personage. If you are to earn any regard, you must not rouse tempers here.
You say these things as though they are a kindness, sir. But I do not think they are.
You were not invited, Miss Fennell. There was no mistake. We will have your work gladly, but there is no place for you within the society.
I see.
Good day, Miss Fennell.
No, it is not. And it will not be until this is changed.
Louisa did not let these barriers stop her. She explored the world. She found the colours in Rome that she had glimpsed while travelling as a child, and she exhibited up and down England and across Europe until 1906, when her world changed forever.
Come in. Oh, hello, Clara.
Miss, we did try to tidy the room, when your father was... But he was insistent. Said that his study was perfectly organised, though I don't see how. Look at all this.
I know. I could never find a damn thing in here, but he navigated it perfectly well. I could talk to him about something as ridiculous as the Queen's skirts, and he would soon have an article in his hand from one of his scrapbooks.
It is quite the collection. What will you do with it all now? Oh, I am sorry. I didn't mean to...
It's fine. It's what I've been asking myself all morning. I mean, the newspaper clippings from the Irish situation, they can be culled into just a few volumes, and some of the European books can be thinned, but...
I know your sisters especially will want to look through everything.
They should. They should. Is it wrong that I don't want anyone else taking these books, though? It's just... there's so much of us in them. Father and I mean. He taught me politics while we cut newspaper clippings, and he helped me understand the cultures of the Orient, the skin tones, the fabrics, the architecture. I learned watercolours here in this room as much as anywhere else.
He was proud of you. You know that. I mean, he was proud of all his children, but he loved you for your bravery more than anything. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have spoken out of turn.
No, you didn't. I'm not my mother, Clara. We can talk. As friends, I hope.
He thought you were brave. To travel as you have, I mean. He was proud of that. That his daughter is known across all sorts of foreign places. As a woman of art.
We spent so much time apart, though.
But you had to. You work.
My choice. I can paint anywhere. But I chose to travel. To exhibit and what for? Really, I mean.
What do you mean, what for?
You've seen what they write about my lithography. If I dare step outside of what a woman should create, I am derided. And the society. They'll have my work, oh yes, and they'll talk about it at great length, and how my education has produced these scenes, but they will not have me. I look at my work now, and it's all a lie, Clara. It's all a lie.
No, your father wouldn't want you to think this way.
But he's gone. He's gone, and he always talked about finding the light. Finding the beauty of things. It was the joy he gave me sitting here in this room that showed me what to paint. And now, I can't find it. The light is gone. It's gone.
It lives on, Louisa. Every time you pick up that paintbrush, your father is nearer to you.
It took several years for Louisa to find the resolve to continue her work, but in time, she did. Eventually, she moved to St John's Square, where she lived out the remainder of her years. Then, aged 82, Louisa died, and she took her place of rest at St John's Church. There, her shared grave went to ruin. Her name became something to write in the footnotes of her paintings without context, without truth. But Louisa kept journals her entire life, and her final entry, beautifully rendered, said,
Never put off till tomorrow what you could do today.
Louisa captured so much of the city she loved, of this city, of Wakefield, and now we remember her.
Did everyone see Bread Street? This was once a thriving street, with booths offering bread for sale from the bakehouse, made with flour ground at the King's Mill. Behind the booths and under the old structures that stood once in there existed a hidden pathway of interconnected cellars leading to the parish church. These cellars, still in place, are now firmly fixed in our myth and folklore.
Oh, Mr. Fennell, are there ghosts? You know how I feel about spooky things.
I don't know about ghosts, Miss Sarah, but there were certainly priests who lived in lodgings both on Bread Street and Northgate that used the tunnels to get to and from the church. It was believed the cellars under the old Mitre pub on Cross Street, where Frank Bird's Gentleman's Outfitters is now, was used as an old church in days of persecution. Indeed, religious images smuggled out of the Chantry Chapel were found in cellars in these houses in 1811. I remember it was the talk of the town, and whilst many deny the existence of these tunnels, there are more that believe that they exist, even to this day.
But so much has changed here, Mr. Fennell. Remember when Louisa painted the entrance to the shambles? That's completely gone now. The entrance was just to the left of where the grand clothing store was built in 1906. Louisa's painting style changed over the years, I noticed, much like our fair city. There is a painting of Northgate that shows that very clearly. Mr. Fennell, didn't your boy Walter apprehend some criminals on Northgate?
He did indeed. It was 1891. A young man called George Stewart began his career of crime by stealing 8 silk handkerchiefs, but he soon became well known for armed highway robbery, and I am very proud to say that my boy Walter apprehended him.
My word, he was brave, Mr. Fennell. And was this young man transported as well?
Well, I cannot quite recall, Miss Sarah. Let's look at this picture Louisa did, with a view down Northgate, towards the old church from Cross Street, as I find it particularly fascinating. If you look carefully, you can see how Louisa's styles are mixed. The promise she had shown when she first won her prize at Wakefield's Fine Art exhibition when she was 18 is clear, if you look at the right-hand side. But if you look at the left-hand side, you can see that she started this painting when she was younger, and returned to it much later on. The detail on the left is what gained her national recognition. It was Mr. Tootall and Mr. Cromack, her art tutors, who brought her gift forward. She was able to paint with such style, even as her health challenged her. She would often come home to rest and to visit places I had taken her as a child for inspiration and to allow her to rest. Mind you, she was always painting, and would often send me letters on the back of rough sketches from wherever she was. I have one here from York I would like to share with you.
23rd of August 1895, Oak Dean, Walker Road, Harrogate. My dear Father, I am sending you the 2 rough sketches of the old city walls in York. The tower has a hoarding partially in front at present, which is close up to the pavement, and the other sketch shows how the houses are built into the wall and the other side. I'm sorry to see the smudges, it's peculiar ink. Anyway, on the other side of the tower is towards the exhibition building, and on that side it is broken down, and it would be possible to walk in. This has been a very beautiful day, with one tremendous downpour with thunder this afternoon. Thinking it looked promising, I had a bath chair at 9:30 and went up to Harlow Hill, and a most comfortable chair it is, and very strong and good man for the work. So I shall have him again, He resides in this neighbourhood and passes every morning at the same hour, which will be convenient sometimes. Harlow Moor was delightfully bright and beautiful, and the heather so deliciously fragrant, but no sooner was I deposited there than great clouds appeared over the hill and just a little splash of a shower from which I got shelter. But it warned me I must not stay so far away. It being then only 11 o'clock, I came back gradually with many a rest on the way and arrived here soon after 12, not overtired. So that was satisfactory, and there was time for rest before dinner, and this afternoon I feel the benefit of that delicious air. Mrs. Charlesworth is most kindly anxious that I should do and have all the things to help me to get stronger, so I hope to prove my gratitude by improving rapidly. Your loving daughter, Louisa Fennell.
Louisa loved to talk about the weather, her health and her artwork, and not necessarily in that order. Before we visit Louisa's grave, I'd like to show you this last picture by Louisa. This is, in my humble opinion, one of Louisa's finest and most polished pieces of art. The town hall that you can see both on the painting and in real life was built after her mother died, and Louisa brought the finest of her skills to capture the beauty of the architecture. Before the town hall was there, it was the site of the Great Exhibition Hall of 1865. It was there that Louisa's artwork beat my own. You can still see as you look down Wood Street not only the town hall but the Mechanical Institute, where I used to lecture all the time about my travels, my interest in archaeology and my passion for Egypt. It seems fitting that is now used by young people to learn the skills of acting and performance, and as a university. May I offer you my arm, Miss Sarah, as we head towards my daughter's grave in the churchyard of St. John's Church. I'd like to pay my respects to my daughter, Louisa Fennell, and to her sisters who are also buried here. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us here today to learn about her life and the life of Wakefield. I'd like to thank Miss Sarah for playing her part, and I'd invite you all to lay your flowers on my daughter's grave the next time you pass. May she rest in peace.